Shall we start? Friends, namaskar and good evening. Can you hear me? Please raise your hand if you can hear me.
Can't see them.
It's on that. Okay. Namaskar and good evening. Welcome to this virtual special briefing. As you know, Prime Minister held the first ever virtual bilateral summit with the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison today morning. To brief you on this summit, we have with us Secretary East Mrs. Vijay Thakur Singh and JS South Mr. Vishwas Sapkal. Secretary East will first make her initial remarks and then we'll respond to your questions. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Good evening, namaskar.
You need to just switch it on. This.
Good evening, I'm going to brief you on the India-Australia virtual summit between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Scott Morrison, which was held today morning. The summit, of course, is the first of the virtual bilateral summits, and that itself is a very significant indication of the importance that we attach to the bilateral relationship between the two countries. The summit was, of course, has a background in the sense that Prime Minister Scott Morrison was to be coming to India, and we had this year 2 sets of dates had been finalized. One was in January when he was to come and in fact would have been the first visitor of 2090 to India. So those that time the visit did not materialize. We had looked at May as a possibility and finalized it 1st of May as the date for the visit, but that too did not take place due to the pandemic, and it was decided to hold a virtual summit. Now this summit, which was held today morning, it was slated to be a 40-minute conversation, but it spilled into 70 minutes. The conversation was extremely productive, and the atmospherics of the meeting were very warm and friendly. Now in this very first historic virtual bilateral summit, it began with the two leaders recalling that they had met on previous occasions on the sidelines of multilateral and plurilateral meetings on at least 4 occasions, and they warmly recalled those meetings. They're talking about virtual becoming the new norm in the times of global pandemic. Prime Minister Scott Morrison recalled Prime Minister Modi's very pioneer role in the use of technology, both domestically as well as in terms of the outreach to leaders across the world. Prime Minister indicated that he was happy to meet him on the virtual platform, but he still very much looked forward to the visit of Prime Minister Scott Morrison to India once the pandemic situation improved, so that we could warmly welcome him to India. The Prime Minister indicated that we value India-Australia relationship, and this is a relationship which is based on shared values, shared interests, shared geography, and shared objectives. Prime Minister Modi emphasized that the relationship is important not only from the bilateral perspective, but it is a relationship that is a factor of stability in the Indo-Pacific region, and in fact in the world, because we are two countries that uphold the values of democracy, rule of law, and respect for international law. Prime Minister Modi said that we have a very high target of ambition for the bilateral relationship, and that we would need to continue to look at practical ways of strengthening the relationship so that the linkages that exist between our two countries, between our peoples, between the businesses, the academics, the researchers, all those linkages are strengthened due to this strengthening of the bilateral relationship. Prime Minister Scott Morrison, on his part, described Australian partnership as a natural and a comfortable one between two very confident and sovereign nations who share an ocean and are also trusted partners. He expressed satisfaction at the elevation of the relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership and expressed the confidence that with the signing of the comprehensive strategic partnership and the conclusion, our relationship would reach new heights. Prime Minister Modi recalled and the role of Prime Minister Scott Morrison to strengthening of the bilateral relationship, and that Prime Minister Scott Morrison had pushed the relationship forward with a clarity of approach and vision. Prime Minister Scott Morrison appreciated Prime Minister Modi's steady, stable and wise leadership in these very difficult times, including in the context of G20 and the Indo-Pacific. As a result of these discussions, we have had two joint declarations. One is the joint declaration on elevating the relationship from a strategic partnership to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And you would see that the document on the comprehensive strategic partnership it covers a range of areas in which the two countries will collaborate bilaterally and even at the multilateral fora. Besides that, there were 7 agreements which were signed. There was a framework arrangement on cyber and cyber-enabled technologies. There was an MOU on mining and processing of critical and strategic minerals, an arrangement concerning mutual logistic support. The 4th one, implementing arrangement regarding cooperation in defense, science and technology. Then an MOU in the field of public administration and governance reforms. Then an MOU on cooperation in vocational education and training, and an MOU on water resources management. So from the set of the agreements also that have been concluded, you can see that cooperation in specific fields have also been arrived at. The agenda in front of the Prime Ministers, it covered, of course, overview of the relationship, and because this meeting was taking place in the backdrop of COVID-19 situation, there were discussion and exchange of views on how COVID-19 had impacted in a very big way health sector, the economies of the countries, and also in fact society. Its impact was deep, and countries would need to work together in a collaborative manner to deal with the fallout of COVID-19. As far as the WHO is concerned, as you would be aware, and it was recalled that there is a WHO resolution now, which has been adopted, in which both India and Australia were co-sponsors, among other countries. And at that World Health Assembly, India also assumed the chair of the Executive Committee of the World Health Organization. In this context, Australia conveyed that they would give full support to the chairmanship of India in pushing forward a positive agenda at the WHO. There was discussions about the reform of the need for reforms of WHO, and Prime Minister Modi indicated that, in fact, we should be looking at international organizations in a manner that they become more dynamic. And he also said that there should be an inbuilt reform mechanism in institutions so that we could look at how they are performing in a periodic manner. Specifically in terms of COVID-19, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Scott Morrison, they had had a telephone conversation on 6th of April, and during that conversation there was understanding that we would work together in a collaborative form in research, in medicine research relating to COVID, And in that context, under the India-Australia Strategic Research Fund, which is a fund which has been operating since 2006, that the two countries would have a special program under which they would work in a number of areas relating to COVID-19, whether it's diagnostics, whether it is vaccine development. 7 areas have been identified where they would be working together. Recognizing that science and technology would play an increasingly important role in times to come, and it was agreed that we should use this collaboration in science and technology in many more fields. Prime Minister suggested that we can look at as investments in terms of a circular economy, converting waste to wealth, in terms of agriculture productivity, in terms of surface coal gasification. Some of these were the areas which were identified for working together and collaborating in research. In this context, Prime Minister Modi suggested the organization of a hackathon between universities of the two countries, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison welcomed that suggestion, proposing that there could be a Australia-India youth dialogue to take these proposals forward. Then in terms of looking at other areas of bilateral cooperation, there was exchange of views on how to take forward trade and investment between the two countries. Prime Minister Scott Morrison recalled that when he was to come in January last year, he was bringing a big business delegation which would also have had representatives from the pension funds. As you know, the Australian pension funds have very large funds, and they have, in fact, one of them, Australian Super, has invested about $1 billion in India's NIIF. In this context, both the leaders discussed the possibility of a conversation between the pension funds and Indian organizations on the Indian side to continue to have a constant engagement on pushing forward bilateral investments and taking those forward. Then in terms of looking at other areas, defense, as you know, in defense cooperation, we have expanded our areas of engagement. We are looking at collaboration in the two agreements, the arrangements that have been signed, mutual logistic support as well as the implementation on science and technology. There was Prime Minister mentioned about Make in India and invited Australian companies to take advantage of India's program for in Make in India, both for defense production as well as in other areas, whether it be shipbuilding or other manufacturing that is taking place in India. The other special mention was made of space. Australia has just started a space program, while we have a long space program. Prime Minister mentioned about India's success in and the work in its space program, its Mars missions, its moon mission, and informed about Gaganyaan, which is the human flight program which we are undertaking. And there was discussion on how the two countries could work together in this particular mission of India. The other areas was, of course, maritime domain cooperation, where it was Australia has posted one of the officers at the Information Fusion Center at Gurgaon, and we would continue to look at strengthening cooperation in maritime domain. We also, there was in the context of people-to-people contact, there was Prime Minister, the two Prime Ministers had spoken earlier, and in that the issues relating to the Indian community there, and in particular the students who are there in Australia, that had been taken up. Prime Minister thanked Prime Minister Scott Morrison for the support that had been now extended to the Indian community, and it was agreed that that they would continue, Australia indicated they would continue to look forward to the Indian students being in Australia, and similarly there was the reference to Australian students also coming to India. As you do know that education is one of the main areas of collaboration between the two countries. Today we have about over 100,000 Indian students in Australia, so that was a topic that came up for discussion. And just to update you, there have been evacuation flights between the two countries. India has taken 7 evacuation flights so far from Australia, and in the month of June there would be 8 evacuation flights from Sydney and Melbourne. So the question of the contribution of the Indian community to Australia was appreciated by the Prime Minister of Australia. Both leaders, in the context of global and regional issues, there was the discussion that terrorism continues to be a threat, and it needs a global response and collaboration. So there was some discussion on the conference on No Money for Terror. Australia had hosted the 3rd No Money for Terror conference, and India would be hosting the next one. So Prime Minister invited the Australian participation at this conference. Of course, there can be no discussion between the two countries without reference to the importance that ASEAN has, and ASEAN centrality is something both India and Australia focus in the Indo-Pacific approach. We agreed to, there was an understanding that East Asia Summit is also another platform where the two countries have been working together. At the last East Asia Summit, Prime Minister Modi had launched the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which was supported fully by Australia, and it was agreed that the two countries would continue to work together. Speaking about the two countries, between speaking about the cultural aspects, there was of course reference to cricket and how those ties can, how that is a very important part of the bilateral engagements that we've had. Prime Minister referred to Prime Minister Scott Morrison's tweet on samosas, and he responded that saying that now samosas has become a very popular word, to which Prime Minister Scott Morrison mentioned 2 things: that next time he would also like to make what he called Modi Mosas and share it with Prime Minister, and he also said that he would next time go also cook some Gujarati khichdi. So there was something which is a very popular food item. Prime Minister, so that was also a bit of in the light vein discussed, but there was the importance of the relationship in terms of how much we can work together and create better symphony was when Prime Minister referred to our two countries working together, Prime Minister Modi, our two countries working together in the Indo-Pacific, and Prime Minister mentioned that the symphony between the Australian didgeridoo as well as the coastal instrument Kombupattu of India, they can both be something in unison, and a great symphony can be created in the Indo-Pacific region. I think I've covered, at least I made the opening remarks, and now open to questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for those remarks. We have received questions which we have clubbed as per different areas. In fact, many of them are related. I will go over them one by one. The first set of questions that we've received are on defense cooperation, on the mutual logistics support agreement, and on naval exercises. And the questions are essentially on what are the details of the logistics support agreement, what are the benefits of it. On the naval exercises, The question is, was Australia invited for the Malabar exercise? Will Australian Navy be participating this year? And these questions are from Sridhar Kumaraswamy of the Asian Age, Siddhant Sibbal of WION, Kamlesh Gaikwad of Kesari, Maha Siddiqui of CNN News 18, Manish Jha of Business World, Suman Sharma of European Security and Defense, and Parul Chandra of Strat News Global. Would you like to respond to this first set of questions?
Defence cooperation is growing between India and Australia, and this was recognized in the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership as well. And so the engagement between India and Australia on the defence side is growing, and is something which was recognized. The signing of the Mutual Logistics Support Agreement, that was done in pursuance of, we have a Memorandum of Understanding on Defence Cooperation, and the arrangement on mutual logistics support was done under that agreement. It provides that when there are exercises which are combined exercises which are conducted, training which is done, when there are humanitarian and disaster relief operations, port exercises, passage exercises, they would be extending support to each other. So that is the broad framework of the Mutual Logistics Support Agreement. As far as specific exercises are concerned, there was no discussion on specific exercises between the two countries.
The next set of questions are on cooperation in the mining sector. I'll read them out. Sandeep Dixit from the Tribune wants to know what are the rare minerals India is looking at, what is the quantum of their imports from China. Does the move to open up coal mining in India to the private sector and making license conditions less onerous reduce the salience of imported Australian coal? Parul Chandra from Strat News Global wants to know, India and Australia have signed an MOU on cooperation in the field of mining and processing of critical and strategic minerals, and plan to identify specific areas where both sides will work together to meet the technological demands of the future. Could you please elaborate on what the MOU envisages? Rizaul Laskar of HT wants to know, could we get details on how India and Australia intend to take forward cooperation on rare earth metals?
The background of this agreement is that Australia has huge deposits of minerals, and and between India, it could be a reliable and a secure supplier of critical minerals to India. So under this MOU, there is agreement to work together between the two countries, between their two institutions, to see how this collaboration can go forward. As far as the minerals and that are mentioned there, they are just indicative. They are indicative in sense of they mentioned a couple of them in the agreement, but not all, because the whole list is long. But you know, there's lithium, there's cobalt, those all have found mention. But it will be a range of minerals and rare earth in which the two countries will be collaborating.
The next set of questions are on China. Was the recent India-China border tensions, was it discussed? This is what Siddhant Sibbal of WION wants to know. Was China discussed in the context of independent international review? This is from Nayanima Basu of The Print. There are similar questions from Srinjoy of Times Now, Rizaul Laskar of HT, Manas of PTI, Shankar Kumar of India versus Disinformation, from Akhilesh Suman. So these are largely the set of questions on China.
There was no discussion on China in the virtual summit.
Then there's a question on education. This is from Rajesh Chandra Mishra of National Coverage. He says both sides jointly decided to enhance their partnership in the domain of education through Australia-India Education Council. What is the intention of increasing this partnership?
See, as I mentioned to you, there are a large number of Indian students in Australia, and similarly, there is a number of Australian students also who come here under a program for internship, but and there are a large number of universities under which There are collaboration between the universities of India and the universities of Australia. So this is an important sector in which the two countries are working together. There is a council under which they discuss these issues. They had last met, I think, in October last year. So this is an ongoing process of discussion between the two countries in the education sector.
And the last set of questions are on SICA. Rekha Dikshit from The Week wants to know if there's any progress on SICA. Suhasini Haidar from The Hindu wants to know, did the two leaders discuss India's decision to leave RCEP negotiations? And did Australian PM request PM Modi to reconsider the decision? On SICA, is there a date for the restart of talks?
There was no discussion on RCEP in the summit. As far as the trade relationship is concerned, as you would see that there is a reference in the comprehensive strategic partnership to recommence the discussions on SICA. So we are looking at working together. No date has been set, but this is something that the two countries would be engaging in. But it would be a bilateral discussion, the bilateral SICA on which they would be engaging.
I don't see any further questions, so this concludes today's briefing. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.